All right, so welcome everyone. Our guest speaker is Jim Keller, Director of Government Programs for Zodiac of North America. Jim has been with Zodiac since 2014, leading all activities in the military and government markets. He is responsible for all business development, sales, contracting, delivery, and through-life support for domestic customers, as well as international customers funded through U.S. partnership programs. Jim has an extensive background in development and integration of complex naval systems throughout the government acquisition process. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the U.S. Naval Academy and has been involved in the military and maritime industry for over 30 years. Before joining Zodiac, Jim led business development and capture activity at Rolls-Royce Naval Marine for shipyard propulsion systems and shipyard heavy lift products, and managed contractor support for Naval Sea Systems Command Amphibious Warfare Program Office, ship acquisition and construction programs. He was responsible for oversight of ship system integration, testing, and certification for WASP-class and America-class amphibious assault ships and ship-to-shore connector air cushion assault craft. Jim resides in Cape Charles, Virginia with his wife, Elle, and a rather unsociable cat. In his free time, Jim enjoys running and vintage auto restoration. Here now is Jim Keller.
Thank you, Marty. I didn't know you'd read that last part word for word, but thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight, and thank you for the membership to allow me to come and introduce or refresh you on Zodiac products. I presume that most of your membership, if not everyone, resides on Ken Island and the Eastern Shore. Yeah, so if most of you have probably at least heard of Zodiac or seen a Zodiac, and I'm going to get into a little more detail on our company and the mysteries of that odd-looking building on Thompson Creek Road that's been a Zodiac outpost for many decades. So, as the name, our catchphrase says here, for those who work on the water, one thing that I'll carry through this presentation is that we focus on military and law enforcement and professional customers and end users. And you'll see how we differ, although we share roots with, we differ from the Zodiac recreational companies. So the three pillars of our business, we are dedicated professional and military watercraft users. And in that market space, we focus on higher end inflatable boats and custom rigid inflatable boats. Again, we'll go into a little bit of detail about what an inflatable boat means and what a rigid inflatable boat means. And since we are an international company, we have a worldwide reputation since we focus on high quality and high capacity boats, we do have a solid reputation to keep up. Now, there are many places around the world where Zodiac Milpro is the only name for high performance rigid inflatable boats. But markets like the United States, we're up against really stiff competition with other very high end boat builders who compete for law enforcement and U.S. military and many foreign military customers. So a little bit about our Milpro corporate summary. So the entire group that's headquartered in Paris is Zodiac Milpro. And there are subsidiary companies within Zodiac Milpro. So worldwide, we're not a huge company. We don't sell massive amounts of boats. And that's why we focus on engineering very high-end boats. So as you can see by the star, we're headquartered in Paris. That's the traditional historic headquarters of the Zodiac company. And it goes back over 100 years. Our three major facilities for Zodiac Milpro will be starting with Zodiac of North America. We are the program management and manufacturing center for U.S. and foreign military sales. We have a major engineering and manufacturing facility in Roses, Spain. That's on the eastern seaboard of Spain. It's about an hour south of the French border. Major engineering and manufacturing facility in Delta, British Columbia. That's just south of Vancouver, and right on the Fraser River. And there are minor sales and marketing and administrative offices in Connecticut, UK. It's in Wales, in Sydney, Australia, and now in Singapore as well. So we do cover worldwide markets. All of these facilities share the same products and the same part numbers and the same processes. But depending on the way military and government contracts and professional contracts are let, we do share customers. It just depends on how the customer has to spend his money and the easiest way to deliver boats. So the broad history of the Zodiac company. The company was formed in 1896, and back in the late 19th century, dirigibles and hot air balloons and inflatable airships were cutting edge technology. And the focus of Zodiac at that time was to create the air holding or gas bags for these airships that wouldn't catch fire, wouldn't leak, wouldn't tear apart in weather. And so as rudimentary as we see that today, that was cutting edge technology 120 years ago. And throughout the 20th century, Zodiac had retained its aviation roots. Although sometime in the earliest 20th century, 1936, there was created an inflatable catamaran for military purposes to transport torpedoes. The purpose of making that an inflatable boat at this time is kind of lost. We don't know the Zodiac engineers who decided it was going to be an inflatable craft. We're not sure exactly why inflatable came up. It was probably a scary thing to carry torpedoes on an inflatable boat, but it proved seaworthy, light, transportable, and even through World War II, the inflatable boat started coming into its own in a military sense. Mid-20th century, the company really saw the recreational and commercial side take off. Since it is a French company, we saw Jacques Cousteau become the primary face of Zodiac. Every time we watched Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, we saw Zodiac boats in action. And the commercial market really took off through 1970. In 1968, as I mentioned in the second slide there, we focus on inflatable boats and rigid inflatable boats. The key here was to create at the time it was wood or early fiberglass hull that was attached to a buoyant chamber. And this caused, it created its own niche in the boat building market because there were no standards for it at the time. And we can talk a bit about what makes a RIB, a rigid inflatable boat, different than a standard hull boat. But it was a broad stroke to put an inflatable buoyancy tube on a much smaller hull and make a boat that handled totally different from anything else on the market at the time. This was all about being light and still being fast and carrying a heavy payload. And keep in mind what was available in 1968, especially in the military market. We were just coming off the end of wood boats, really starting into fiberglass boats. But the weight and the transportability of this boat really made itself stand out. And so we moved to the next stage of Zodiac development. In the 80s, through the 90s and through today, the company started to divest its subsidiaries and start to focus on individual markets. So Zodiac Aerospace, which exists today, became its own company. And Zodiac Aerospace still focuses on commercial aircraft cabins and escape systems, life rafts, some ejection seat systems, and some avionics. But again, totally different company. All of these companies I'm talking about must now share the name Zodiac, but there's always a descriptor afterwards. So we have Zodiac Aerospace. And what was left was Zodiac Marine and Pool. And I say marine and pool because much of that product line was still recreational. And Zodiac at the time was making inflatable pools and pool toys and pool skimmers and anything inflatable that was used in the recreational market, Zodiac made. But again, to focus on very special markets, again, in the late 80s, the company split and there became Zodiac Nautic, which still exists today, making recreational rigid inflatable boats and recreational inflatable boats, and Zodiac Milpro, and that's the office I'm sitting in today. Again, we focus on the military and professional market. Although we share very close roots with Zodiac Nautic, a lot of the boats look the same. In fact, some of our hulls, our fiberglass hulls, are even based on the same hull molds. Apart from that, the parts and the interchangeability have really diverged in the past 20 years. And there's not many things you could buy from our company and install directly on a Zodiac Nautic boat, a recreational boat, and vice versa. And so I'll talk a little bit about the three major elements of Zodiac Milpro, starting with Zodiac of North America, again, here in Stevensville. When I say created in the 70s, the facility we're in on Thompson Creek Road was created in the 70s as a recreational warehouse. And today we're 50 employees and we build and we service and we do just a little bit of design for inflatable and rigid inflatable boats. So we have 20,000 square feet of production. The bulk of that is for making inflatable boats from scratch, literally from whole cloth. We build an inflatable boat here. The only things we buy that are already made would be the wood transoms and D-rings and fittings. And one thing that makes us special to serve the U.S. market and a lot of the special contract requirements would be our international trade in arms compliance. So that in itself is an administrative burden or skill or whatever you want to call it, depending on the level of effort any day, but sets us apart from recreational users. You'll see a few of the types of boats we build and our typical customers. At the top is a Marine Corps 4.7 meter inflatable boat. In the center, I think that's an Anne Arundel County police boat. That's a fiberglass 7.5 meter rib. And at the bottom, that's a swiftwater rescue boat that's used by countless fire departments and swiftwater rescue teams. And that photo is taken at a swiftwater rescue training facility in South Bend, Indiana. So Zodiac Milpro is a charter member of the International Association of Whitewater Rescue Personnel. It's a long name for an organization that trains probably 50% of the professional trainers in the U.S. who go out to fire departments and then train swiftwater rescue personnel. Number two of three major components of the Zodiac Milpro group would be Zodiac Hurricane Technologies, located in Delta, British Columbia. Zodiac Hurricane Technologies was, into the 80s, its own standalone rigid inflatable boat manufacturer. And the Zodiac group bought Zodiac Hurricane outright. So because the name was so entrenched, especially in Canada, retained the name Zodiac Hurricane Technologies. But again, they contribute to the overall engineering and manufacturing capability in the Zodiac group, 115 employees. And as I describe the types of boats we build, you'll see that they are dedicated to the highest performance boats and the most specialized boats. So heavy effort on research and development and engineering and prototyping. Very few inflatable boats manufactured out of Zodiac Hurricane. Again, if in Canada they have a requirement for inflatable boats, they'll typically be manufactured here in Maryland or in Spain. And they also run the North America ISO compliance, and our facility in Maryland falls under that 9001 compliance. They too are ITAR compliant. Now, even though they're located in Canada, they do manufacture U.S. government craft. And that's an important thing for them to have their ITAR, their International Trade in Arms specialization certifications. you'll see in the lower left, that's a U.S. Navy mine warfare boat. It's a 11-meter rib, diesel jets. That was a very special boat, built this some protected specifications by the U.S. Navy, and because that Canadian facility was ITAR compliant, they were able to do the engineering without any restrictions. The boat on the right is a French Special Forces boat. And since that boat has been seen around the world, a lot of our foreign customers have seen that in action. And if they have the funds, they can either buy that direct from Zodiac Hurricane, or in 2 instances, they've used their U.S. partnership funding to buy direct from our office here in Maryland. And number 3 of 3 major facilities in the Milpro group is Zodiac Milpro International, so called because it was the first remote facility from the headquarters in Paris. So it became the first one to have a Milpro International name. Again, it's located on the eastern seaboard of Spain, on the water. And the nice thing about its location is it has every sea condition you could imagine is there on that rocky coast in Spain. It makes an ideal place for research and development and testing and prototyping. They have the heaviest engineering presence. They own the old legacy designs for inflatable boats, which again, that goes back 50 years to an inflatable boat. It's a very unique design, and it took it took a large brain to imagine what an inflatable boat meant and put it into production and make it reproducible. And as I get into the description of what we do in Maryland, we'll describe some of the challenges of building an inflatable boat. But the most important thing to note about the capability in Spain is we have people who go back, there's decades of corporate knowledge about the concept of inflatable boat. And it makes it vital for us to have that brain trust. So if we're going to improve those inflatable boats, they have to know where to start instead of copying another design. So back to a little more detail about what we do in Stevensville. Again, we're the U.S. headquarters for contracting and production. Again, there are some U.S. government contracts and municipal and state contracts that require products to be built in the United States or to be contracted and purchased through a United States entity. So, we're the U.S. tax entity. So we're a legitimate U.S. company. The military customers you see on the right-hand side, that's pretty straightforward. We focus on special operations with the capital S, capital O, and some other smaller special operations organizations. It's mission focused. So there's very little that's off the shelf in our products to the U.S. military. Lots of inflatable boats and a few special purpose rigid inflatable boats. Off to the left-hand side, you'll see a mix of other government agencies and professional agencies and law enforcement agencies. So other government agencies means an organization like NOAA, and they have lots of research vessels and survey vessels that all have a different type of requirement for a work boat or a survey boat on board. We have Army Corps of Engineers. We have for professional users, there's National Geographic on there. There's plenty of, someone was mentioning the, vacations and cruises to Alaska. One of our largest customer bases is ecotourism in Alaska and Antarctica. So the inflatable boats are very attractive for these customers. They like the fact they can put them in the water with lots of people, very heavy payload, and there's very little damage if you go bumping into things, whether it's icebergs or sea lions or anything else out there. It's a pretty nice boat to have and not damage the environment. And then for law enforcement, there's everything from state to federal law enforcement to small municipal law enforcement. Same thing with first responders, volunteer fire departments use our products. And so in this group, there's an even wider range of products. A very small fire department can really take advantage of a very small swift water rescue boat, but not a lot else. Something they can fit in the back of their pickup truck and move around easily. Someone like NOAA uses a very special shipboard rescue boat that has to be SOLAS certified and is able to be hoisted aboard a 30-ton research vessel with a center lift davit. So that's the range of products we sell to all of our government and municipal and professional customers. And then the history of our timeline at Zodiac of North America. So as I mentioned, the facility here and on Thompson Creek Road was established in 1970. It was the company was headquartered in South Carolina at the time, and this was the Maryland warehouse for recreational pools, life rafts, etc. In 1980, this was turned into a sales and distribution spot. It grew on the warehousing spot for recreational products. And there started to be a staff here for sales and distribution. In early 2000s, the U.S. government focused really turned to buying those traditional inflatable boats, the FC-470s, from a U.S. company. Some of the government contracting requirements changed. So there was an urge to get this facility transferred to a manufacturing facility so we could fill government contracts. And that's really taken off in the past 10 years. So we started with inflatable boats where we could produce, I want to say 30 inflatable boats, depending on the size per month. Then we increased our capacity to boat rigging, meaning rigid inflatable boats. And then we increased our ability to build inflatable boats and the collars for rigid inflatable boats to a new fabric. And now we have just a workshop extension where we've eliminated most all of our warehousing, and we're all manufacturing and contracting now in Stevensville. So one thing worth noting about the fabric parts of our boats, whether it's a fully inflatable boat or a rigid inflatable boat, there's two main fabrics that are tossed around. There's Hypalon, which is a trade name, and it's chlorosulfonated something. The acronym is CSM, also known as neoprene, and that is a glued product. So every boat you see that's made from CSM neoprene is totally glued. And it's a very interesting process. I'm hoping that at some point you have the opportunity to have a tour here of our factory, and you can see boats being made firsthand. But it's a very labor-intensive process, and it's not exactly sail making, and it's not exactly boat building. It's something in between. But there's a very special skill set that allows people to take a flat piece of fabric and turn it into an inflatable air-holding boat. And the second type of fabric we use for that is a polyurethane coated fabric. And for the most part, that is thermally welded. So we have semi-automated machines that are calibrated for heat and dwell time to allow the fabric to pass through at the right speed. Again, that takes a very special skill set to interpret the way the welds are coming out to adjust the machinery to make a boat. So our workforce is, we're probably on the high end here, about 50 employees, 35 boat technicians, and that means someone who has, again, the very special skill set of building an inflatable boat from scratch. There's nothing we can take from the industry, or very few places where someone can come to us, a new employee, and say, well, I've been building inflatable boats for 10 years. That really doesn't happen. It's all about learning on the job. There are skill sets we use for different phases of building an inflatable boat, and it probably takes on the job with full production about a month per skill set to master for a new boat builder. And then it's probably all of a year before someone could build the boat entirely by themselves. So the other technicians that we have are ABYC mechanics and electronics and electricians, and they really focus on the rigid inflatable boat rigging and construction. And this middle bullet about what we focus on for rigid inflatable boats, that SRR and SRA, I'll describe that in a minute. That's a terminology for the types of boats you see on the lower right. That's smaller, more common rigid inflatable boats, either in fiberglass or in aluminum hull. Again, our internal training program is absolutely necessary because we don't have the luxury of getting experienced people come on board who've already built inflatable boats. So there's a set of training requirements that for major U.S. government contracts, the U.S. government recognizes the special skill set for building an inflatable boat and requires us to prove our QA and our training program before we win major contracts. Any questions so far before we move on to our product summary? So again, I assume that most people have seen Zodiacs and they've been on them or owned them. And probably even in that instance, if you've owned or been in a Zodiac, it's probably been a fully inflatable, like a yacht tender or a dinghy. So here's our range of boats. So we do make, as I mentioned, inflatables, anywhere from a 4-meter swift water rescue boat to a 7-meter heavy lift utility workboat. The 7-meter inflatable boat is a monster. It's got a payload of about 4,500 pounds. And it typically runs on about 115 horsepower engine. But that boat, the 7-meter boat, is mostly used for the ecotourism. Again, it's very low to the water. It's very stable. It's very forgiving, carries a lot of weight, and it's easy to store on board tour ships. The higher end boats that we use, what's pictured here for military special forces, has a variety of floor systems we can put in the boat, has a variety of engines, special systems for dropping from aircraft or storing underwater. The Sea Rib is our mid-range of rigid hull inflatable boat. So an inflatable boat is, everybody recognizes the inflatable tube that goes all the way around, and there's a fabric membrane that forms the floor. And to create the V in that, there's another inflatable tube that creates a keel. And then we lay our floor across that, and the floor is captured by the tubes. It forces the keel down and creates your V. So you can see everything in that boat, except for the transom the engine is mounted on, and a strengthening piece up in the bow is all fabric. And then we can add our handles and D-rings and lifelines and whatever else we need anywhere on that boat. But that boat, when you unscrew some valves and let some air out, it can be rolled up into a package that's about the size of a 55-gallon drum. The difference between that and a Sea Rib, well, obviously a rigid hull boat. So what does that mean? In the boat designing world and the standards of boat designs and the ISO world, a rigid inflatable boat is quite different than a standard hull boat. And it all has to do with your hull shape and the amount of buoyancy and the stability and healing moments. So why wouldn't everybody be building a rigid inflatable boat? You have to ask. Well, they're more expensive. And in the high performance world, it can be difficult to attach that collar, the inflatable collar, to a rigid hull in a reasonable way that makes it removable for maintenance, or if it does get damaged, it's not catastrophic and doesn't cause degradation of your buoyancy. So there are engineering challenges to making a rigid inflatable boat. Somewhere in the middle is a boat that's built to standard hull requirements. That means stability and buoyancy requirements. And they simply have a big oversized foam bolster on the outside. Looks like a rib, but behaves quite differently. In fact, behaves a lot more like a standard hard-sided hull. So our Sea Rib range is a medium, more or less off-the-shelf design for a rigid inflatable boat. We build these in aluminum and fiberglass hulls. Outboard, there's only a few inboard versions of this, but depending on the size of the boat, we build these anywhere from 4.5 meter up to 11 meter now. And they'll hold anything. The 11-meter boat can carry 200-300 horsepower engines or diesels, depending on what horsepower, because they're very heavy. But we don't do a lot of customization on the hull. What we do on these mid-range boats is we're able to arrange the deck in any configuration the customer can want. Because of the design of a rigid inflatable boat, the deck is sealed and it's flat, and there's really nothing under deck except for voids, storage, and fuel. So a customer could ask for an aft center console, a cabin version, 12 seats, no seats, a T-top offset. There's almost nothing you can't do with the workspace and a rigid inflatable boat. But again, these are more affordable, they're quicker to build, and it's easier for a customer that doesn't have very specific requirements, easier to visualize what we have available. The highest end boats, the hurricane ribs, are all custom. Even in hulls that we have established that are an aluminum hull that's been in use for quite some time, these are reserved for customers that have very special requirements who now need motion control and gyro stabilization systems that have to be mounted under deck, or they have dual consoles and much higher end power requirements for special communications, for boarding teams like hostage response and Coast Guard boarding teams and other special forces boarding teams. There's special powered boarding gear that's used on these boats. So naturally, the cost goes up. There's some other capabilities these boats we'll talk about in a bit too that also drive the cost up. But what really is the value of these boats is the engineering that's dedicated to solving customer mission issues sets these apart from our standard off-the-shelf boats. So let's get back to kind of an overview of the inflatable ranges and the rigid inflatable ranges. Four broad areas for inflatable boats. Smallest, lightest would be these emergency rescue boats, swift water rescue. Again, 3 meters to 4 meters. What we'll call a smaller utility boat is very lightweight and very simple. The valving to inflate and deflate the boat and the floor systems are very simple. They're designed to be the most cost effective for the size. So up to 5 meters for the grand raid utility boats. Military boats, 4 meters to 6 meters. Like I described, these are very heavily driven by customer requirements and special fittings and integration with aircraft and submarines and other things the military has for special missions. So naturally they cost more, but in general, the materials they're made with are heavier too. In a lot of cases, the military doesn't care about weight. They do care about spending a 50-mile transit in the middle of the ocean. Your boat has to be tougher, so they'll trade weight. And the last category of these larger boats would be work boats. You can see one of our ecotourism applications here on the lower right. Again, a perfect boat for carrying lots of people, very stable. Really, it's the only boat where it's safe to sit on the sponson on these boats. You do not want to be sitting on the sponson on a rigid inflatable boat doing 45 knots in the Chesapeake Bay. Not a safe place. But at maximum speed on an inflatable boat, if you're hanging on to the lifeline, you'll be safe. Our C-rib range, again, this is the middle range. Different hull types are called SRMN and Sea Riders. Generally smaller, up to 6.5 meters. They're designed so that the helmsman and crew are sitting in jockey-style seats. Lower to the ground, they have a jockey pod, smaller wheels, smaller helm wheels, typically single engine, can very easily be hoisted aboard larger motherships or trailered. And the next size up would be SRR and SRA. And that stands for Sea Rider Response and Sea Rider Aluminum. These boats go from 6.5 meters to 11 meters. And because of the size, they can be fitted with cabins or seats or T-tops. But again, heavier boats designed for a full console and the size where we can start putting shock mitigating seats and other environmental protection systems on. And lastly, a little bit more detail on the hurricane boats. Well, any capability is possible is kind of the catchphrase here. If we have a boat that there's no full cabin that exists, we'll make it for the customer. That's what they need. The boat on the lower left, that French Commando boat, there was an existing hull for that. That's 9 meters. It has 2 Volvo 600 horsepower diesels in it. The French customer had a very strict weight requirement, so the hull was redesigned in a special composite just for that program. So costly, yes, but again, it was all mission driven per customer spec. And a few of the features that set a very high-end boat builder like Zodiac and our and our contemporaries apart from other builders would be innovations based on mission. So hybrid collar shape. Typically on a rigid inflatable boat, your collar is round because it's simple to build all the way around. And it's attached to the hull. Either it's glued. People don't realize that, yes, we do glue inflation collars to a hull. But in the case of a larger ribs, they're all attached with a bolt rope, which means you slide there's a C channel in the hull in 2 places and a kind of a fat rope that's sewn to the hull, to the buoyancy collar, and it slides in all the way down the hull. Again, that's a simple thing to solve on a fully round collar. Much more difficult if you want to save weight and provide more workspace in a boat. So engineering innovations mean trading weight and seakeeping ability for workspace and mission requirements and crew protection. Stepped hull is, again, an interesting nut to crack. Stepped hulls are nothing new, and there's plenty of people making stepped hulls, but by and large, they're designed for straight line performance. And in a military application, especially when you're alongside a larger vessel and you're boarding it, or you have to make fast maneuvers, the stepped hull is not necessarily the best solution. So in this instance, we have a patented hull that has a specially designed air channel in the middle to stop skipping. So again, this is patented, and we do license this to other builders, but in a very special instance. The problems this solves for military applications is, again, if it can increase your speed or your efficiency or your payload by 10%, you make the trade-off between carrying more fuel or carrying more payload or spending more time at sea. Some other special things that we're able to accomplish, again, given the same boat, we can put our rigid inflatable boats on virtually anyone's mothership. These are the different types of davits. The most challenging of all these, what you'll see in the lower left is a well deck. So that's a Navy EOD boat launching from a trailer from a well deck of a Navy amphibious warfare ship. It's not the most stable thing, but since they carry 5 or 6 of these ribs in their well deck, there's no other way to launch it. There are less safe ways to launch it, but that's not what the Navy prefers. The next challenging thing is upper right, the stern pocket. Yeah, this is pretty common with the Coast Guards around the world. That can be a fairly hair-raising evolution when you have heavy following seas. You need a very responsive boat, and you need very precise centers of gravity to turn and stop and relocate yourself without putting yourself alongside the boat instead of in the stern pocket. And more standard types of davits to put yourself aboard a ship, like a double arm davit or a single lift davit. But these are all engineering challenges for a standard hull. Another special thing we do along with very few boat builders is air transport and air drop. Air transport is more common, but with every military, the folks who own and operate the aircraft are very skittish about putting weird things in their airplanes and having them bump around. So we do have the capability of doing full aircraft analysis for our products. And you see a little excerpt at the top of a Coast Guard, their boarding team boat. They have a few, 2 on the West Coast, 2 on the East Coast. And so they're able to air transport those boats wherever they're needed. At the bottom, air delivery, that's an even trickier solution. And the problem is sending it out of the aircraft and having all of that support structure leave the boat without bumping into it while it's in the air, either under canopy or in free fall. So some of our expertise means that we cooperate very closely with the government certification agencies that say it's okay to put that boat in the aircraft and throw it out the back door. So our boats are typically, the end is we're able to drop quite a few boats out of a C-130 or a C-17 and some foreign aircraft. I just want to wrap this up with our training capabilities mean that we have full support from delivery of the boat through parts and maintenance training up to simple piloting training for someone who doesn't even have one of our boats. So we don't necessarily sell training with the boat. It can be done in parallel as well. So commissioning of new products, our US customers, they're more than familiar with boats and how to drive them. But since we do deliver boats to lots of places around the world, they're not so familiar with even how to drive a boat or check fuel or maintain their batteries. So full commissioning, what we'll call commissioning, it's really, it's a familiarization training and show them how to unpack and operate their boats. Maintenance training, we do full maintenance, like factory maintenance repair. Some of you have probably attempted or seen attempts at repairing an inflatable boat. Sometimes they're really great because the tools are good, and sometimes not so good, and everything looks like it was done with home improvement glue. So the training we provide, either at a customer site or in-house, is real factory training, and it does depend on the type of boat that was originally delivered. A lot of the tools are very special to the fabric, and then the customer can take that away and order all those tools and fabric as they go. Special techniques training. This is very important for police departments and divers. As I mentioned, we're a member of IAWRP, so we're heavily involved, especially in swift water rescue training, parachute recovery training, and everything it takes to operate a boat and the divers safely in the water. Again, the rib does handle a bit differently than a standard boat. You can do more things with a rib safely than with a standard hard side hull, but you can also get yourself into trouble by attempting to do those things. So it's important that someone who knows how to handle a rib in tight situations like pacing, where you're actually in contact, we'll say at 40 knots with the boat next to you and you're transferring personnel, that can be a tricky situation without having expertise to show the customer the way to go. So I hope I've made it in within my time period. What I'd like to do, if anybody has any questions, I just want to, in the background, I'm going to run a short video here that it'll show you some of the products that we have in a loop. And it's eye candy, or you can ask questions as you wish.
Thanks a lot, Jim. It was fascinating. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself. I'll call on you to avoid chaos. Mike Mazinski, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question for Jim?
Yes. Are you all having the same problem getting new employees as everybody else is?
Absolutely. We have a big flag out front that says now hiring. We do. And it's not so much that we get people in the door that are capable, but we really simply are not getting people in the door.
Right. Because you said you have to train everybody because it's so specialized.
Yes, exactly.
What's the average time to build a boat?
When they're in production, it can take about 3 weeks for an average inflatable boat. And so, that's from taking it off the roll. Fortunately, we do now have a CNC cutting machine. So there are computerized templates for each boat. So you can imagine every boat comes out, and to make a round collar, it's made from flat panels, but it has to be cut. So the CNC capability really speeds it up. 4 years ago, we were still cutting by hand, right, with templates, just like it's like a dressmaker pattern. But North Sales, that used to be next door to us, closed up shop and moved, and we were able to buy their sail cutting machine from them, and it really improved productivity here in the shop.
Anybody else with a question, please unmute and I'll call on you.
Yeah, I've got a question. What is the typical lifetime for an inflatable?
Well,
Go ahead.
If you, you know, with proper care and so the key to long life for an inflatable boat, whether it's a rigid inflatable or a fully inflatable, is to keep it inflated. Oddly enough, you don't want to let it go flat, and you want to keep it clean. So even in some pretty extreme environments, we do maintain boats for naval special warfare, and we've seen boats that were built in 1999 come back, and we do air holding checks on them. Let me turn that down a little bit.
I know one area that those of us that use inflatables for dinghies have had problems with is the wooden transom. They seem to rot.
Yeah. So wood is still it's the toughest material out there, and there are a couple ingress points where a wood transom is in an inflatable boat. You can get some moisture in there, so you keep your boat dry, you'll be okay. Now, the problem with an alternative to a wood transom is there are composite transoms, but there hasn't really been much study on is that composite material as tough as a marine plywood transom. For example, we have our 6-meter boat, and it can handle a 115 horsepower engine. We know that a marine plywood transom can handle the cycles, and it can handle shock and vibration. We're not so sure just yet about composite transoms. There's maintenance also. There's the fully thermoplastic transoms, flex, and once they crack, they're done. It's very difficult to crack a marine plywood transom. Maintenance is another thing. If you put a ding or a nick in a marine plywood transom, you put some paint on it, you seal it, you're okay. With a fiberglass transom, if you put a nick in it and you don't take care of that for 3 or 4 days and it's in the water, it's just like your fiberglass boat. You don't want to leave nicks in your fiberglass and not take care of them. So for now, we're still focused on marine plywood as the proven solution.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else with a question? All right.
Just a thank you. Very exciting
Mike.
presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, and yeah, thank you everybody, and yeah, I'd be thrilled if we're able to put together a factory tour. That would be fantastic. But yeah, thank you, Marty, and again, thanks everybody. I'm really I'm honored to have this chance to present to everybody.
It's terrific, terrific. Before we sign off and stop the recording, Commander John Locke, do you have any comments about upcoming activities for America's Boating Club Kent Narrows?
Yeah, a few things, Marty. In September, well, let's go to October. Annapolis is having a rendezvous at Harrington Harbor South that looks like a good one that people might want to participate in. That's on October 1st, that weekend. We'll have our regular XCOM meeting on the 6th of October. And the 20th will be a membership meeting, but it's kind of up in the air on whether it'll be on Zoom or in person. And we'll just have to see how COVID is doing when we get into October. We're planning seminars for October, November, December. And please put on your calendars the D5 Educational Conference, the 11th through 14th of November. Oh, and don't forget, on the 20th of November, Maryland plays Michigan. Go Blue.
Thank you, John. All right, well, everyone, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. And we'll sign off now. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very good. Thank you.